We're going to begin the 18th century and cover three of the art movements that are very descriptive of their style: Rococo, Neoclassicism, and Romanticism. One of the things in terms of Rococo that we want to discuss is to recognize that with King Louis XIV's death, we see a shift from the grand manner of Poussin's work to Rococo. So it leaves this kind of more rational thought to follow a style that is really reflecting the aristocrats' life at the time period. So the style of the work can be described as very extravagant. It's oftentimes busy. The painting manner is kind of thick. It has pastel-y colors, so a lot of lights and pinks. Our key artists are Watteau, Fragonard, and Thomas Gainsborough, though his work is decidedly very different from Watteau and Fragonard. We see the head of the political power had been in Versailles, as we talked about with Louis XIV. That is abandoned and moved back to Paris. So we see a shift from the monarchy to the aristocracy. They hold a lot of political power, a lot of wealth, and we see work reflecting the leisurely life of the aristocrats. This new style of fete gallant is actually termed and used in the salons. We also see Paris townhouses being redone in this Rococo style. Intellectuals and aristocrats meet in these Parisian homes and have very deep and intellectual, witty conversations. One of the biggest things that is driving the artwork and the intellectual thought of the time is the Enlightenment. Some of the key things of the Enlightenment is that there's a growing understanding of things. There is a more of a questioning of and distrust of religion and the church. Science becomes more trusted, and scientific questioning is encouraged. Knowledge and reason become the basis for a lot of the paintings that we see. Philosophers of the time, there's a list for us to see here. The Enlightenment really is seen in a lot of the artwork in this chapter, and it leads to the Industrial Revolution of the 1740s. Classicism can really be said it's a reaction to the frivolous work of the Rococo and the Rococo ideals. Remember that a lot of these artistic movements, they're not happening in a bubble. They're happening because of real life being lived. We have a return, though. It is called Neoclassicism because it is the new classical movement. So again, the love of Greco-Roman work never really leaves. So we see the return of these themes and subject matter in neoclassical work. Some of the reasons why we see this, though, are the excavations of Pompeii. There's a renewed interest in Italy and classical work because they're finding ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum. You'll read about the Elgin marbles of 1816, that Lord Elgin finds all this marble and brings it back from the Parthenon. That's why the British Museum currently has so much of it. The artwork at the time can be described as very heroic and restrained. Especially David, Jacques-Louis David, the French leader of neoclassicism, seeks to revive painting. He thinks it should have a high moral purpose. You'll see different genres in this chapter, but history painting is at the top of the list, and that's what we see West, Reynolds, and David painting. There's a school, the Royal Academy, that really comes into play in this chapter. Artists are promoted. We see the salon playing a big role. There's annual exhibits and critics. There's a grand tour that is encouraged, kind of like a trip around Europe to see all the must-see sites. The French Revolution, of course, is a big player during this time period. The American Revolution of 1776 really influences France, and their own revolution happens in 1789. So we see a lot of the work in this chapter by Goya and David that's very political. As we make the shift out of neoclassicism towards Romanticism, we have a time period where we still have some of these key artists like David, Ang, who are painting but they move into a new style and content, subject matter shifts and changes. They're still painting in that same reserved, very organized style, no brush strokes, very clean and classical. But the purpose of the artwork shifts. Under Napoleon, who is the first consul and emperor of the new republic, the French Republic, the majority of this artwork, he's the patron, so naturally it glorifies him. So David gains favor again and is the first painter of the empire. So we see several of his pieces glorifying the new emperor. Gros, Canova, and Eng are also favorites and work for Napoleon, so we see artwork by them as well. As we move towards Romanticism, again, rejection of neoclassical ideals, they are driven by emotion, not reason. So we start to see artwork that is just full of color, full of diagonals and triangles. It's not linear, it doesn't follow the classical harmonious ideals. We also see just some change in the modern idea. We see the cult of the individual. We see characteristics of artwork of the Romantic time period are imagination. They value dreams and freedom and intuition. Some of the inspiration goes back not quite as far as classicism, but medieval, Baroque, and Middle and Far East. So the exotic is something that you see quite a bit. Violence, nature, the style is quick. You see a strong light and dark, so think like Caravaggio, so don't get those time periods confused. We do start to see some different genres. History painting isn't as important as it was in neoclassical time period. We start to see landscape, especially towards the end. We see narratives of heroic struggle, and you'll see quite a bit of animals or wild animals or just really chaotic scenes. Our leaders of Romanticism are Géricault and then Delacroix with his Liberty Leading the People. We then see works by Fuseli, Blake, and Goya, and those can tend to be, especially Goya's, on the darker side. Our English leaders are Turnbull and John Constable. For remembering history, it helps me if I can have kind of a timeline in my head and remember certain dates so that I can kind of hinge all of the artwork off of those. So I've given some dates here that I like to remember. The 95 Theses that we've already covered, remembering when the American Revolution is and the French Revolution follows not far after. Remembering when Napoleon is crowned because all of the artwork really shifts after that. And then I love Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, as well as just the moving music and story of Les Mis. So remembering when those dates are, they really fall into, this 19th century Europe time period. And Les Mis, especially when understanding France and, the French Revolution of 1789 wasn't the only one. There were lots of other revolutions after that. Not as big, but Les Mis does cover, as well as Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, another revolution that happens after the fact. So those dates don't have to be your dates, but pick a few so that you can kind of revolve some of your artworks around those dates of history.